So I'll give a little introductory matter. For those who don't know us, let's just talk about worldview to start. So there, as Pastor Ray was saying, there is kind of this worldview that takes a view that, well, Christians are kind of weak. You know, they rely on faith, and they're trusting in the Bible, and the Bible has all these errors in it. Why should they be doing it? Let's trust in science, because that's what's true. And of course, we all know that's not the reality of the situation. We have to fight against that perception that there are. So we know Bible's true. Once you're a Christian, you have that inside assurance. You have things that just you can't explain to a non-Christian that are there, the truth that is in there. And the people who rely on science are really trusting a lot more on faith than they realize. And we're going to point out some of that a little bit, because if you dig deeper and deeper into biology, it gets more and more complicated. And the Darwin's principles are 150 years old, and the theory just hasn't kept up with that. So it's really out of date. ID is a relatively new concept, about 20 years old, and it'll show God's presence without using the Bible. So again, getting back to these people that have the worldview of, I'm not going to look at the Bible, I never want to go to church, I want to only believe in science, you can show them things that God has his handprint. God's handiwork is visible out there, and you can show them that through some of these problems that evolution has. So we're going to look at an example. Tonight we're going to be looking at metamorphosis, which is an incredible kind of thing. As Pastor Ray mentioned, we have a technical background, and Betsy gave a talk, I think it was about 3 years ago, on the species and their relation. You know, you look at species, you see they're related. Well, the non-Christians say that proves common descent, that everything came from the same organism. And then Betsy goes through the point of, no, it's much more complicated than that. And a common creator would use those same principles to have similar things back and forth. And the good news is the similarity relationship means that we can look at various other organisms and study things in humans. Like Betsy gave an example of how fruit flies can get drunk. And if you put them in a test tube with alcohol, you can study the effect of alcohol and learn more about alcoholism on fruit flies without having to test us for the effect of alcoholism. And of course, the things go on. So there are some great uses of that. Then I gave another one about how long would it take for evolution to occur. And I gave a quantitative example of how if you had something that had no vision and suddenly it had vision, that is a huge hurdle. But on the other hand, if you go to a textbook or you go to Encyclopedia Britannica, they've got all these eyes lined up. They've got the eye spot, the snail eye, this eye, going up to octopus eye. And they're saying, see this progression that shows evolution and action. And my example was saying, but if you go from no eye spot to one eye spot, the proteins you need to make that work are very, very complex. And if you do a calculation on random permutation, there is just not enough time for that to happen. So I'm going to move on. I could look at this slide for a long time. That little butterfly fluttering, that little clip is very attractive to me, but I realize that some people get motion sickness by looking at it too much. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. I think. Oh, I bet that would help. And you've probably all heard a little bit about evolutionary theory, and I'll just kind of review that very rapidly. So it describes how diversity of plants have progressed over time. There's another one called Evo-Devo, which is more about embryonic progression of how things evolved in there. Now, both of these have similar problems. There's various fields of study, they look at that, but those are two concepts that are tightly related in there. The basis of both of them, though, has to do with random variation, and we know that. I mean, some people would say, is that evolution? I don't believe in evolution. Well, you should believe in that because you don't look like your parents. Your children don't look like you. In some cases, that's good. But if you're raising dogs and you have a litter of puppies, they're not, even if you have the two purebred dogs, the puppies are not identical. They're different. Now, that is combined with natural selection to come up with changes over time. That in those variations, there's advantages. Let's say a deer is faster, it's got stronger muscles, it's more able to get away from the predators, and so that deer offspring would be preferred. It's natural selection. Of course, we use that artificially. That's how we grow crops that have better output. The output of corn has probably increased by a factor of 3 over the past 100 years. So with the same amount of land, we get much more corn crop out of it, and we can feed more people with it. Now, those two are combined over a long period of time with this single universal common ancestor. That's what really was done by Darwin. He put it together and saying again and again and again, you use these principles over millions or billions of years, and you go from a single cell organism to an elephant. And if you really try to pick that out through the various steps in there, there are steps that are missing. You just cannot go that far. Evolutionary theory says that changes during development can be used as a template to describe long-term evolution. That you can say how things would change over time. A lot of times people use a tadpole as an example. There's this concept that things lived in the water, the fish went up on the shore, developed feet, and started walking all of a sudden and moved to land. And of course you can do that. I mean, a tadpole is an example of how you could move from a waterborne, gill-based structure onto a land-borne-based structure using lungs. Now, there's a problem with that because the tadpole has always been that way. The tadpole genetic structure is built in. In other words, the very first frog came from a tadpole. It's no different than now. The genetic progression inside that tadpole is there the whole time. There are problems with the abrupt changes, like going from one thing to another, going from a water-based organism to a land-based organism. There's missing links. And you've heard that. Missing links have been around for 150 years, as long as Darwin's been talking about it. It was always, well, we just need to find more fossils. We need to find the links, and then we'll understand all that. Well, they haven't found those missing links. In fact, it's getting more because they find new species and there's more gaps. So the situation is getting more complicated rather than simpler. Another one, normal development, the life cycles have some abrupt changes as well. And we're going to look at some of those. Metamorphosis is one of those examples where it's going along in one mode and suddenly there's a transition. How does that transition occur? And I'm going to go through this stepwise, and I'm going to challenge your thinking about this. So I'll list it once, we're going to look at a video, and then we're going to list them in more detail because I think it's very instructive to kind of push into your mind the real problems with this. We're going to go through a sequence of crickets, grasshoppers, and then moths and butterflies, and look at that progression. So starting with crickets, that's the simplest example. Oops. They say metamorphosis, evolution explains everything. You just think about that a little bit. So the idea of going through metamorphosis means that the young are in one environment and the older ones are in a different environment. And that means there's less competition. So that it really makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary viewpoint. But does it really make sense to you that it would be that way? Is that why ants or cockroaches have become extinct because they didn't go to a different niche and go through transformation. No, they're different, but that is not really a great survival mechanism. They're entirely different. As we look at the butterfly, for example, you'll see that it doesn't really go into a new niche. It's just living a different mode. So the statements they make are just not well supported by fact when you go through them. Now, there are things that don't go through metamorphosis. Here's a good example. You're very familiar with these. Probably seen them around your very house over the years. I don't know, or your neighbor has. There's no real stepwise. In the middle, you'll see that they've got those puppy paws, those great big paws that are too big for the puppy size, but they grow into it. So you really can't say there's changes there. On the other hand, let's look at something like a cricket. A cricket looks the same all the way in between. What you don't see is they go through molts, which are called instars. So this is really a strange concept, but effectively it's like a crab. It just grows until it's full inside this exoskeleton. And then a change occurs, which is really fascinating as well, that causes it to split. It comes out, and now it's bigger and it has more room, and now its shell forms, and it's a new ability to stepwise grow. That is fascinating to me that can happen, that effectively your outside skin zips off, you're out there, and it's probably traumatic for the cricket because they say you lose some of your mouth parts and intestine. So when you have this new skin, you have to grow these parts back again so you're able to eat and live. How could that happen by evolution? But we're not going to talk about that because that's a simple example. We're going to move up to the harder questions to answer. Let's move on to grasshoppers. And of course, here's another one we all know. As a kid, you've probably been around those a lot. Now you'll see that there's a stepwise approach of growth in there. You'll see down near the middle, we have wing buds forming. And then over here we have full wings. Now that progression occurs again over a number of molts or instars. So there might be 5 or 6 different steps that occur in here. And you can say, okay, I can kind of see how the wing buds form, and the next molt there's bigger wings that come from underneath, and then a grasshopper learns to fly with fluttering over weeks or something like that, and it develops in the next stage, and it comes on over a period. Even there, I mean, if you had wings, how long would it take you to learn how to operate those wings? A lot more than a few weeks. But it's still that same case of, okay, that's harder than the cricket situation. But let's go with something harder. Let's go with the butterfly. So we start at the top, kind of top left, with an egg. That egg hatches. The butterfly starts growing, and this is a monarch. Probably the most common one you find in your field or online. I go to the right on the top. It goes into the pupa or chrysalis stage where it transforms. And near the bottom, it comes out as a butterfly. And we're going to look at the transitions in here and try and understand all the changes that occur in that chrysalis. So I'm going to next give you a list, and I want you to be thinking about that, about the different steps that form. What I will point out is right here, it sheds its skin at the top, and this pupa is, in other words, that forms inside the skin. Once again, it goes through maybe 5 or 6 steps of splitting its skin and having another caterpillar, but then it splits its skin, and we see this pupa stage, which fastens itself to a branch, and it sits there, and in a period of 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the species, it changes. I want to point out on the right-hand side here, just over halfway down, it's green above and it's multicolored. That occurs in 1 day, and I'm going to come back to that. That's where it gets the color. Before then, it's kind of like what you see on your windshield when you're driving in Wisconsin in the summer, that green stuff on your windshield. But in 1 day, it changes this color to butterfly wings. Let's start looking at all these changes. One, the caterpillar is long and chunky, but it now gets a more streamlined, and it's multi-segmented. If you've seen a wasp or a butterfly, it's got those different segments. There was nothing like that. The caterpillar was just all the way down, and it looked like it had maybe 15 or 20 different segments, but now it only has a few segments. It has legs, long, thin legs. The caterpillar didn't have that. The caterpillar had very short little grabbing things, and then it had pseudo legs on the back that allowed it to hang on to the plant. All of a sudden, we've got long, thin, segmented legs with hinges instead of just little grabbers. We have 4 wings. There was no vestigial wings that we saw in the caterpillar. All of a sudden it comes out and it's got wings. It's got a hollow tongue. Before it had this, just a little, think of it similar to our mouth. It would just bite. You've all seen pictures of it, and you will see it in the video again of them just eating. Bite, 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 eating. It's the eating machine. And then all of a sudden, it's got this tongue that is effectively as long as it. So imagine we had a 5-foot tongue. Where would we put it? And why did that come about? Of course, it needs that because it's getting nectar out of flowers. It has a whole new digestive system. It had been living on plants, and in fact, it had been picking up some of the toxins from milkweed. That was its national defense. So there's pictures you could find online of like a blue jay eating a monarch butterfly and then throwing it up because the toxins from the milkweed are poisonous and it can't eat it, and that's a natural protective mechanism. But it doesn't hurt the butterfly, or the caterpillar can eat that and stores that up inside the system. So it's living with a toxin in there. But now, as a butterfly, it only needs to eat nectar, sugar content. So it's entirely different. It was kind of the heavy cellulose, probably starch in the milkweed, and now it's eating the refined nectar. It has a much better sense of smell and taste. It can find out what it needs, and it needs that because it's traveling much more rapidly and has a better sense of sight. So you know how fast the caterpillar goes, and you just think about how fast a butterfly goes. Maybe 1,000 times faster, I don't know. So it needs much better sensors to be able to get around. Now, here's a real question. We've seen this list, and you probably could come up with 8 to 10 things on that list. They're all major changes. How did evolution make those changes? Evolution makes a change at a time. Did the little tiny legs get longer, longer, longer? Did those little tiny wings get bigger, bigger, bigger? No, because those would not be effective. Little tiny legs are not an advantage. Slightly longer legs are no advantage to the caterpillar. So you can either look at it forward or backward. Which one came fast first, or which one could you live without? What would be the last one to do it? It's an incredible hurdle. And so to help us see this, there's something called the John 10:10 Project, which has video clips online. If you search John 10:10, you can find this. And we're going to see. Joe, what button would I press, or do you? Okay. And this sound. So can you get sound on here? Okay.
On a planet bursting with mystery and wonder, perhaps no phenomena triggers a sense of the miraculous more clearly than the life cycle of a butterfly. Depending upon its species, a female butterfly can lay hundreds of eggs during her brief lifetime. Each initiates an extraordinary process of growth and transformation.
The eggs are remarkable in themselves. They have species-specific architectures, some of which are just astonishing. For instance, if you look at a monarch egg, it has a beautiful symmetrical structure. It looks like a little miniature dome or cathedral.
Ranging in size from a pinhead to the width of a child's fingernail, each egg is attached to a plant by an adhesive fluid secreted by the butterfly. They are lined with a coating of wax that helps keep them moist and viable. In many species, the eggs hatch within a week. Then the newly emerged caterpillar, or larva, wastes no time embarking on the second stage of its journey to adulthood.
We call them eating machines because that's their only purpose in life, is to just eat and grow.
It's just munch, 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 munch. Slice and chew, slice and chew, to build up the raw materials for the next stage of life.
A caterpillar could gain in weight so fast that it would be eating its own weight in leafy material every day.
Equipped with powerful jaws and a digestive tract that extends the length of its body, this stomach with legs can multiply its birth weight more than 3,000 times in less than 2 weeks.
To show you how remarkable this weight gain is, imagine you had an 8-pound human baby and he multiplied his weight 3,000 times as he was growing. That would be a 24,000-pound child. That's a big kid.
A caterpillar's growth is punctuated by violent surges of transition called molts.
Imagine the outer skin of a caterpillar as being sort of like a wetsuit. It's got a little bit of stretch to it, but limited. It's waterproof, so they don't dehydrate. Now, as the caterpillar grows, it fills out that wetsuit, and eventually it reaches a point where it can't grow anymore, and it has to make a new, larger version on the inside.
A molt begins when a caterpillar spins and then grasps a silk pad, anchors its body securely with small barbs on its legs, and splits its skin near the capsule covering its head.
There are sensors in the cuticle, in the skin of the caterpillar, that are strain detectors. They detect the amount of pressure or strain being put on the skin. And when that is too great, they send a signal to the brain of the caterpillar, which then releases a hormone that causes molting.
After several molts, the caterpillar stops eating, finds a secluded spot, and spins another silk pad. When finished, it attaches itself with a pair of claspers on the end of its body, then hangs, almost motionless.
It will hang there for a day or so, usually in a J position. All kinds of chemical reactions occur within that caterpillar. It changes color and you have no idea what's going on inside there until all of a sudden it pumps the fluid so that the skin begins to split.
The caterpillar's final molt marks the beginning of the third stage of a butterfly's development and the appearance of a remarkable structure called a chrysalis. As the old skin is pushed away, the cremaster, a thin extension on the top of the chrysalis, works its way into position to permanently grasp the silk pad. With a scanning electron microscope, the cremaster is magnified more than 500 times.
The caterpillar has microscopic hooks on the cremaster, and it attaches those hooks to that silk pad that it puts on the bottom of a leaf or twig. And it begins to spin, and this caterpillar spins and spins and spins because it wants to get rid of that old skin that it has.
During the hour that follows, the chrysalis hardens and takes its final form as one of the most fascinating processes in nature is set into motion. The metamorphosis from caterpillar into butterfly.
What you see in a chrysalis is not a shapeless mass, but in fact, something very much like a mold for the adult butterfly.
You see the wing pads where the adult wings are going to form, and you see the head and the compound eyes appear, visible through the outer case of the pupal shell. Abdominal segments are very clearly separated from the thoracic segments where the wings are going to be attached. All of this is astoundingly new compared to the caterpillar, where everything looked sort of the same down the whole length of the body.
In a metamorphic insect, what you've got is two body plans. You have to first form one functional body plan, and then you have to switch gears and you have to take and form a new body plan. I am amazed by development when it goes from egg to caterpillar, because it's such an intricate process. But then you have to enter into the chrysalis stage and you have to get it right again. So it's like the problem squared.
The creation of a butterfly begins with the partial destruction of the caterpillar. Inside the chrysalis, larval cells that form the caterpillar's limbs and organs are systematically digested and broken down.
You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built.
The magnitude of this transformation has been compared to a Model T Ford that suddenly encases itself within a garage. Inside, most of the car breaks down into fragments of metal, rubber, and glass. These pieces then reorganize themselves into components more complex than any that previously existed in the Model T. After several days, the garage door bursts open and a radically different mode of transportation lifts off into the sky.
Now, an analogy like that is pure whimsy. But even if it were somehow possible, I don't think turning a car into a helicopter would be nearly as impressive as the actual transformation that takes place inside a chrysalis. It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. How did this happen? How is it regulated? How is it controlled? This astonishing, remarkable transformation. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world. designer with foresight and a sense of engineering and artistry, and the ability to light up the sky on a summer afternoon with magnificent evidence that life on Earth is the product of something greater than a blind, undirected process.
I'd mentioned that the video is freely available online. If you go to the John 1010 project and look for that, you can download it and show it to your friends. What I want to do is go through those and repeat that and see one step at a time. We're going to dig deeper into each of those changes and try and understand it. So one thing I'd mention was that thinner, lighter, multi-segmented body. Each of these has a pair of legs attached, and two of them have a pair of wings attached as well. There was nothing like that on a caterpillar. They're just suddenly showing up here for the first time. And then the number of legs itself. We had about 16 little stumpy legs under that caterpillar. Now we've got long ones. It's a huge change. It goes with those new body segments. So it's a new body plan entirely. How could that come about? How could that happen? The back four grip vegetation and the front two are held for kind of as sensors. They're along the body most of the time, but they want to taste the milkweed before they lay eggs. Let's go through the wings, another step. There's two hind wings, two forewings that show up all of a sudden on the body plan there. And it's not just, oh, I have wings, but they have to be integrated into the body. You have to have muscles. You have to have the sensors to make these things work. How do you inflate them when you come out of there? They're kind of folded up and then they expand over a period of maybe an hour or so. They pump in a fluid that then hardens inside there, and then they have the solid wings that we're familiar with. If you find a dead butterfly, the wings are stiff. Obviously, when they come out of the chrysalis, they're flexible. Hollow tongue is also very interesting. The caterpillar just had mouth parts, kind of similar to us, but now you have a two-part hollow tongue. It's made in two parts, and it has to be assembled once it comes up there. And that's how it can reach down deep into a flower to get the nectar out. I haven't been able to find any graphics showing how these two halves come together, but they must be assembled. That it's kind of like getting a model something in a model shop, and it goes together and it kind of clips in place. So it's designed for self-assembly. So there's no parts, no fastening, it's not in one. And of course, one of the interesting features, it's flexible, so it can coil up to get out of the way. Imagine the digestive system. Its whole life it's been eating plants. Now it stops eating inside the chrysalis. It redesigns its digestive system. So from a big, long one, it's now a lot smaller. Instead of eating plant parts, it's now focused on nectar. When they're talking about it like redissolving itself and reforming, it's like amazing. That by itself is unexplainable. The sensory part of it, better sense of smell and taste, which it needs because it's traveling so much faster. The egg is laid on milkweed, so it knows what it needs to eat. It doesn't have to go very far, probably only goes through a few leaves over its life. But now it has to travel miles from plant to plant. And of course, we don't have time to go into the migration to Central America where it spends its winter, traveling thousands of miles to get down to wintering there. It's one of the few insects that migrates that far. So it's got antennae at the front, which are part of the sensors. It has a much better sense of smell, which it didn't need. Suddenly it has this sense of smell, so it can find a mate so it can find the milkweed, so it can lay the eggs. All of these things are essential. It was such a change from the past. The caterpillar had only little tiny tentacles. If you look at the front, they're very short. So it's like maybe a factor of 10 longer. And of course, it's now, instead of just a little antenna, it's spread out to pick up those sensors. And it had a very limited sense of smell before, which it didn't need. Now it does. It needs it and it has it. So again, let's ask the question. Which would, oops, I forgot to cite. It has these different segments in there to pick up different, so it's a compound eye instead of a very simple little eye. The caterpillar had multiple tiny eyes. Now it's got a large compound eye, similar to what you'd see in a bee or a fly or something like that. So it can travel at higher speeds and process that. But another mystery, how can it process all these little things into an image of the area? And so it can process, it can meet, it can get its way around and find where it needs to go. Such a change. There was no slow progression from the simple light dark that all the caterpillar could see into these multifaceted eyes. Now the question, again, I've asked it several times, but that really is the point I want you to think about, is how could these happen? Which would come first? Which is the last one it would need? We have the body, we have the longer legs, we have the wings, we have the tallow tongue, a much smaller digestive system, the sense of smell and taste, and sight. All of these things are together. And I think the answer to the question of which would come first and last is they're all needed at once. It's a concept called irreducible complexity. I had talked about that in my last talk, and it comes up there. I think it's a nice sense of that. You can't just take one thing. You can't have slightly longer legs that slowly grow. You have to have legs this long. And all the other parts all have to come together at once. This term was concept. A concept was coined by a fellow named Dr. Michael Behe. I'll give you a reference to that book if you want to get it and read some of the other examples that are in there. The examples he lists in that book include blood clotting, immune system, and the bacterial flagellum. Each of those things has multiple parts, and you can't have a functioning part without the others. Let me come back to the timing issue. We've got to make all these changes in 2 weeks. That's the time it's in the chrysalis. So you come in there as a caterpillar. It's like Houdini to multiple levels of complexity beyond that. You go in there as a caterpillar, and it's not like, oh, well, it just figured this out through evolution. You've got 2 weeks. You've got to dissolve the old structures. You've got to build new structures compactly because they're inside this chrysalis. You come out, and you'll notice the body kind of is compressed, and the abdomen expands, the wings come out, they start to inflate. It's really put together in a fascinating way. And there's one that they didn't really mention in there, but I've just added that as well. You need to stay alive. How can you do that? And let me go back to their analogy in that film clip of the car going down the road and making a tent and coming out as a helicopter. Think of another form of that. You're driving down with your car on the interstate, and you say, there's a gas shortage. We're going to pull off in the rest area, and we're going to reconfigure our car into electrically powered helicopter. So instead of a gas tank, I'm going to make a battery. Instead of a motor that runs on gasoline, I'm going to make an electric motor, and I'm going to have a electric helicopter. Well, if you're going to fix your car, very seldom do you do a lot of the fixing yourself, unless you have special tools. We're talking about pulling off in a rest area, and the car kind of reconfiguring itself. It has all the parts it needs. There isn't any auto parts store, no Napa right down there to put it. You've got to have everything. And you say, well, wait a minute, I need more copper for the motor, or I need a new sealant for this, or I need a different lubricant. The caterpillar has all of that internally. It has all the supplies together. That just raises this to a whole nother level. But wait, there's more. At the genetic level, the changes that make the physical changes are even more astounding. In the swallowtail butterfly, Betsy found a technical paper that describes what's going on. There's almost 2,000 genetic changes that occur between the caterpillar and the chrysalis stage. If you remember, it forms that silk pad, it fastens up there, starting to make some changes in there. It's doing that due to all these genetic changes. And on top of that, there's additional over 1,000 changes in the conversion from inside the chrysalis to out in the caterpillar, into the butterfly stage. So it's phenomenal with the number of changes. And normally you think of one genetic change at a time. It's very rare. It takes a long time. Suddenly, in a 2-week period, you have this. Now someone says, well, it didn't just do that first time. It's happened. Well, there's no stages to gradually happen. The first butterfly we know of did this, like the present butterfly. There's no way to slowly move into a butterfly that I can imagine. What does this mean? Well, wait, there's more? I'm getting so excited. I've practiced this a number of times. I'm jumping ahead because I know what's coming. The color of the wings is not a pigment. You know, we paint our house, we go and buy a can of paint. If you remember inside the pupa there, it's green, and all of a sudden we see the wing colors. It's making those wings with nanostructure scales. That means the scales on the wings are less than the size of a wavelength of light. And that's what makes that color, that nanostructuring. And it only happens in about a day. That change in there is right near the end when the wings are ready to form. They're finally building the wings in the final stage. It emerges from the chrysalis, inflates its wings, and in a short period of time, like on our order of an hour, it's ready to fly. It doesn't go through some training period, like a little child in training pants learning to walk or something like that, and other functions. It's there. It's ready to go, and it needs to, because remember, this caterpillar and in the pupa hasn't been eating for weeks, maybe 1-2 weeks of the transition period. So it had to have enough. Not only did it reconfigure itself, dissolve itself, start again, but it has to have enough energy to get to the nectar to replenish its supply. Absolutely phenomenal what it goes through. What does this mean for the theory of evolution? Well, here's a quote from Richard Dawkins. Although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin made it possible to be intellectually fulfilled atheist. I think he is way too optimistic. I don't see any way forward. I've given this talk a number of times. That slide has been out there, the film clip. No one has come up with an answer. They tend to dismiss it because they like the world mindset. They want to be in control. If there's no God, there's no morality. You can do what you want. So this really causes you to give up your own control about that. What does this mean? Well, I think we come back to intelligent design. All these features and changes seem to be pre-programmed from the beginning. The very first butterfly we know of had all these steps in there. You can't make the steps by any known process inside the DNA of that butterfly. It had to be there. And so I see no other option. Now you noticed I really haven't included anything from the Bible. There's no church talk in here. This is based strictly on science, but it is fully compatible with what we know about God. We know about God's handiwork. We see his pattern out there. Let me just give you some of the references, and I can come back to this if you want to see more at the end. These are all done from that film clip, scientific journals, other things on the web from secular sources. It's not some secret knowledge that Christians have. And just to show you, again, put this in we're used to a butterfly. We see a butterfly, we see caterpillars. We aren't there watching the transformation. What would that be like if it was in our own life? And I show you this cartoon to try and make you think about that. Of if we had such a sudden transformation in our life, how would that affect our life? And finally, let me give you those ties to the Bible. They were not in the presentation, which can be done in a secular group, but here are the things we know. Don't be conformed to this age, but be transformed. And the Greek word is the same as that metamorphosis. It's that same concept. That change that we see as a Christian, the renewing of our mind, is that level of change from something to something entirely different. The second quote in Matthew, where we see Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, it's the same thing. So we have our bodies, and we know all the shortcomings of our bodies. Half of you are wearing glasses. I mean, you don't want to wear those glasses, so we're all looking forward to the transformation someday when we get a heavenly body. Zip out of our earth suit, which has wrinkles and stains and things like that, and have a heavenly body. So that's a transformation that we all have to look forward to. And at this time, I'll see if there's any questions on this. If they're really hard biological questions, I'll pass them to Betsy. Okay, Jennifer.
You said that, like in secular arenas, they don't even touch this, but so anywhere they just completely ignore the butterfly, or what is their thought process?
I would say the answer is yes. I have not heard. If you don't have an answer, you don't go there, right? So I've not heard of any counter to this. And I am willing to give this talk in a more general audience if there was a place. I mean, I feel like I've got this. Maybe I can't answer every question, but it's not designed to answer everything. It's to get people thinking like, okay, I mean, I didn't like your presentation. You forgot to do this. And I say, okay, you think about it. You come back with a counter. What would you say?
I think I would add too, if you think about scientists, working in the lab, they're concerned with whatever system they're working, alcohol is what it counts. And they know that the species are related. And so you can do work in a fruit fly and find the genes that make the fly more susceptible in the human. There's a system of doing it. And so they see that it's more convenient to say it's evolution, but they don't really think about is evolution true, because what they're concerned about works. You can take these very simple organisms and do work that can find out in humans. Yeah. And so, if you confront them, they say, what does it matter? Right. Because in their work, it doesn't matter. Right. Yeah. So they're the Dawkins and who are some of the other people that I call them evolution.
Bill Nye.
Yeah, Bill Nye. The evolution.
Evangelist.
They're the ones, and they're not in science really. I think Bill Nye kind of was as well. But this is something that, on the other hand, there are in science, the more, not the ones just doing the hard research, lab research, but there was a conference in England about 2 years ago that was saying, hey, wait a minute, evolution isn't working well. We have to kind of transform it. So you're starting to hear more and more in the science fields, more of the philosophy of sciences people who are saying, because they're seeing this stuff. Yeah. And they're saying, what do we do with this stuff?
Right. I think we saw a video on that about how scientists were like, wait a minute, we need to figure something out here because this 150-year-old Darwin theory isn't good working.
And then the other thing that is encouraging is in engineering, people are starting to get involved. And so they go into the systems, like within the cell, how does this work or how does that work? And they reverse engineer what they see in the cell to do something over in their field with the machinery or whatever they're designing, because within the cell is so phenomenal, it works so well. They're reverse engineering, so they're admitting what they're looking at in the cell is engineered. Because it's a reverse engineering that they're using to develop whatever they're looking at. So there's some sides that people, they're not going to say it's God, but they're starting to say it's not. You're hearing rumors of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
This was fascinating. Thank you. I never thought about a butterfly quite like that before.
I didn't either until maybe a year ago. I started thinking on this, and it's come together. And it'll probably be in a paper. We'll probably publish this in the coming months or so.
That's great.
The John 1010 project also has a lot of different short films that are.
Pastor Ray knew about them. I gave a copy also to Tiffany that you might use in school. But there's 20 of them on all different aspects of this.
They can just browse through John 1010. Just Google it.
Okay, at this point then, I'll close this in prayer. Our Father, we thank you again for the chance to get together and learn more about your amazing world, to see what's there. And really, this is an answer to the question of, what about natives in Africa? What about people who've never heard? Your truth is out there if they look for it, and you reveal yourself to people. And so really, there aren't really any excuses to people out there. Help those people to seriously think about the consequences of turning away from you, to see that you're the answer to these difficult problems in life, that you give them strength, especially in times of difficulty when their confidence in the worldly view breaks down and they're going through some serious life event. Come alongside them, reveal yourself to them, and show them that you are there to comfort them and you're the answer to all these questions in life. In Jesus' name, amen.
In just a minute,